Well, g'day, friends. Welcome to our Exponential Australia Church Leaders, Church Planters Collective, beg your pardon. So glad you've been able to join us. We are a smaller group this evening, but still so glad that you've been able to jump on a Thursday evening. That's a big sacrifice. We did have a morning gathering of the Exponential Australia Church Planters Collective this morning, which was a wonderful success. Great to gather with about 20 other church planters, but so glad that you've been able to jump on. As you can see, we're a small group. So what we've decided to do tonight, rather than kind of go through a bit more of a formal journey, as for those of you who have jumped on calls in the past, we have chosen to keep it a bit more informal, really just an opportunity to both connect, but also hear from our guest this evening, Sam Chacko, who I'll introduce very, very soon. Thanks so much for jumping on. We really want to create a space in the evening, particularly for those who are either bivocational or for those who may be planting micro expressions, just opportunities to be able to connect at a time that is not in traditional work hours, because we know that that can be an inhibitor to church planters being able to get on these types of calls. So it's wonderful to see you. We're small in number, but strong in spirit, I'm sure. Before we jumped to hearing from Sam, and it's great we're really able to showcase today. We had Jeff Bennett on the morning call, who is the VP in the US, and Sam is a project manager who is also a bivocational church planter as well. But a couple of quick things before we get started, because just some housekeeping matters that we wanted to let you guys know about. Really quickly, we wanted to just acknowledge on behalf of Exponential Australia, just acknowledge the lands upon which we stand, particularly our traditional custodians upon which we meet digitally. For me, I'm on Darug land this evening, and we wanted to pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be on this call, as well as elders past, present, and emerging, acknowledging that God's Spirit dwells on these lands, and we want to commit ourselves to working together for reconciliation. One of the things that we told the group that joined this morning is that the hope of this space is we wanted to make it as helpful and effective as possible. And so we're going to be releasing a survey off the back of our second quarter Church Planters Collective, which is really just to want to hear from you as church planters. What is helpful? What are you kind of wanting to learn about, focus on, speakers that you may want to hear from? We don't want these collectives to be a detraction from ministry, but actually enhancing your ministry. And so sending out a survey that may just be an opportunity for you to feedback to us what you found helpful and what hasn't necessarily been helpful. Secondly, the hope of these collectives is really to be able to provide a network and a place of belonging for church planters right across and around the Australian church, both in terms of denomination, where people are geographically located, and also for those who are doing different expressions of planting churches. The beautiful thing about Exponential is we're not trying to champion any one model of church planting, but really to be an encouragement to any and all forms of multiplication. And so if you found these gatherings helpful, we just really want to encourage you to be able to share with other people who might be trying to plant churches, or people who are passionate or even beginning to evoke a curiosity about planting a church. So feel free to share that by word of mouth. Because of the informal nature of our gathering this evening, we are going to have ample time for Q&A. And so in a moment, I'm going to throw over to Sam to tell us a bit about himself and his journey, and particularly what Stadia is doing. But if you have any questions, we're going to have a space for Q&A at the end of our time. Fourthly, and I recognise there's a couple of different housekeeping matters here. You may have already heard that Exponential Australia has our first national conference happening October of this year. We're super excited by that. That's happening at New Life Church on the Gold Coast, a 2-day conference, October 17 and 18. We are joined by an incredible range of global and Australian speakers, John Tyson from New York City, Pete Gregg from 24/7 Prayer in the United Kingdom, as well as people like Sam Chacko and many, many Australian contributors, particularly in the workshop space. So one of the exciting things, particularly for those who are involved in this Church Planters Collective, we have almost 150 church planters in our growing collective from all around Australia, is that we want that to be a gift to you. And so what we've been able to do is offer that at an ultra low cost of only $50 for church planters. Now, that price is only for those who are in the church planters collective, and they can bring a guest, whether that be their spouse or another person that is in their core team. But we wanted to completely take away the price barrier for people to be able to come to that conference. And the beauty of Exponential, both here in Australia, but in its origins in the US, is we're really just hoping to provide a bit of a buffet for church planters when it comes to how they're sharpening all that God has called them to do. Absolutely lastly, because I know there's a lot of housekeeping matters there for a very small group this evening, but we've got a bit of a surprise at the end of our time, just to be able to tell you about an offer that Exponential Australia is able to give to church planters. For those who have been on previous calls, you will know that we have tried to bring in different Christian organizations and groups that are passionate about equipping the church to be effective in its mission. And so we've got a bit of an exciting offer at the end of our time together that I'll tell you about, which is really just a gift to those who are planting churches. And so excited to be able to do that. That is plenty enough of me speaking. Welcome again. I know, again, we're a small group, maybe for the three guests that we've got, plus some of the team that is here as well, just to kind of make it a bit more informal. Why don't we just in the chat throw where you're from, what's the church that you're involved with, where are you joining us from this evening? And as you're doing that, in just a moment, I'm going to hand over to Sam. For those who have not heard of Stadia Church Planting, Stadia is based out of the US, and its aim, its vision, is to help start new churches that thrive, grow, and multiply for the next generation. We were very blessed as the Exponential team and about 80 Australians who went over to the Exponential conference in March to be able to spend a day with the Stadia team, particularly with their CEO, Greg Nettle, and their VP, Jeff Bennett, who was with us on our morning call today. And they just have an incredible vision to want to see a world where every child has access to a church, which I think is a beautiful vision and something that is a all-encompassing kingdom vision that I think many of us can get around. They are interdenominational. They work both all around the US as well as right around the globe. And it was a real privilege to have both Jeff on our call this morning and Sam with us today. And Sam, we're so glad that you can be with us today.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. It's good to meet you guys and to spend this hour with you. So thanks for this opportunity.
So good. Well, Sam, maybe to begin with, as we're kind of a small informal kind of gathering this evening, why don't you first tell us a bit about yourself, some of your journey, tell us about Stadia, and even just kind of what you're noticing in the church planting landscape as you've been involved in this kind of work for like the last 15 years.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself. Grew up in the church. My dad I'm Indian American. I grew up in the US, but my parents are from India. He's planted 2 churches in India and then planted a church in the Philadelphia area of the US and pastored that church for 40 years before he retired and moved to Texas where I'm at. And now I'm his pastor. So that's kind of weird. But it's been, so just grew up around ministry, serving, and I thought I'd never do ministry. I mean, I loved the church, but I saw the hard aches of ministry. And so even growing up, just was like, hey, I'm going to earn a degree, make a lot of money, be great, but bless the church in ways of just giving and serving. But God had different plans. And so I thought I got called to ministry doing a missions trip in India, standing in the middle of a Hindu temple, and really standing there watching women basically throw their money at these idols in the hopes that these idols would give them a baby. I sensed that God was calling me into ministry, but I thought it was more pastoral care, like hospital chaplaincy. And so I did my seminary with the hopes of emphasis on ministry, pastoral care and hospital chaplaincy. Got married 20 years ago. And the week before we got married, my brother-in-law, who was 17 at the time, drowned in a lake. So one Saturday, we were burying him the next Saturday. We were getting married. And it was about 20 years ago in September. And so really realized that God was prepping me to care for my extended family in that season. Um, and um, and yeah, and so we joined an Indian church in Dallas. That family, church family, took care of us, loved us well, really helped us in our first several years. 3 years in, that church asked if we would consider being the youth pastors of the church. For us, it was an easy yes because the kids were at our house all the time anyway. Like I'd come home from work and they were kids sitting on our couch. They figured out our garage code and they would just come in and eat our food. And so we're like, at least now we have a little bit of authority to speak into them and so we said yes. The pastor said yes, the board said yes, but the church did not say yes. There were people in the church who were adamantly opposed to it, and basically more for cultural reasons of we didn't have youth pastors in India. The moment we get a youth pastor here, the kids will want their own service and they won't worship with us, and they'll start bringing people from the neighborhood, and we'll lose our cultural identity as an Indian church. And unfortunately, our names got caught in the middle of just a lot of mess. And the week our second son was born, we had to make the hard decision of leaving the church. And we thought at that point ministry was done completely. And then some of the kids from that church came to us, asked if we do Bible study with them, started meeting at first in our house, then in another church. And the Bible study just explodes and grows from 6 kids to 150 in like 6 months. And we have no idea what God is doing. God's bringing people left and right. And so we do that for 3 years. And then we felt like God was calling us to transition to a church. God opened the door for us to get a facility. We set a launch date, did our prospectus, did all of this stuff to launch. And we thought we were going to get 100 people to join us on Sunday morning on March of 2011. And we ended up getting 20. No one came. We found out a week before that there were pastors of the Indian community who got up on their stages and basically said, hey, if your kids go to Loft City, Sam is a cult leader, so don't send them. And so all of these people that were part of our Bible study did not end up coming. And so we started. So I immediately realized full-time ministry was not an option for me. Ended up bi-vocational. In those days, not by choice, but by necessity, just because we had a facility that sat 150 people and we barely could fill the first 2 rows of the building. And so for the last 15 years, I have been bi-vocational in ministry. And while that was hard, now looking back, realizing God's hand in both of them, like the first Indian church, if those folks didn't make it really, really hard, Ann and I probably would have left that church and just joined another Indian church. But it was so ugly that we were just like, hey, we can't go back to an Indian church. But then even the pastors getting up and speaking and saying the things that they did, if we had started with 100 Indians, it would have been really difficult to become a multi-ethnic church when we were that big with one ethnicity. And so today our church has over 30 ethnic groups, people from almost every nook and corner of the world. And 20 to 25% of the church are people who have come from non-Christian backgrounds, like Hindus and Buddhists and atheists. And it's just been really neat to experience and see that. 2 years ago, got an invitation to join the staff at Stadia and serve Stadia as a project manager, where I basically get to walk with church planters in 3 roles. One, I coach them, just giving guidance on decisions that they have to make, consulting of, hey, here's some recommendations of things you should be doing, and then pastoring them. Church planting's hard. They've got highs, they've got lows. And so sometimes my calls are basically them being able to grieve or vent, and I just get to point them toward Jesus and remind them of the call that God has given on them and to trust in Jesus in that. And so been doing that for the last 2 years. Right now I am serving about 18 planters all over the US. My heartbeat is 1, church planting, but then 2, bi-vocational church planting. Bi-vocational church planting is so hard to be able to kind of balance life. You've got church, you've got your work, you've got your family. I remember about 8 years ago, my wife basically came to me and said, "You're married to church and work and not to us," right? And it was a hard wake up call, and helping figuring out like, hey, how do I know God's called me to this, but how do I do this where my marriage is not secondary to ministry? And so really putting an emphasis on that. So I love the work that I get to do. I love pastoring the church. We just in February sent out our 14th person from our church to either plant a church or be on staff at another church. So God has been just producing leaders from our church community. And we just started a pastoral residency and trying to figure those things out where I think that resident is actually going to take over for me is what my gut says. So just really been excited to see God's hand and work. And then I think your next question was Stadia. Is that right?
Yeah. There's so many different strands that I want to pull on from what you've already shared, Sam.
Yeah.
But I think the next one would be particularly tell us more about Stadia. And then I've got two further questions that I'd really like to take us in once you've answered that question.
Yeah. So as Charlie said earlier, I think you missed one word, but the Stadia's vision is we want to help you start growing, thriving, multiplying churches. It's not Stadia churches. We come alongside of you. We know that God has given you a vision, a idea of what God has called you to be, and so we help you do that. And so we do things like the discovery event where we are helping you discern if you're called, if now is the time to plant, and what skills do you need to be able to plant. Then we do trainings. We've got online trainings for funding and building a team, and so many management teams, so many other trainings that we have created that are digital. We're creating an app that's about to be released that just has a ton of trainings available. Project management, my team, we're walking with you 6 to 18 months before you launch. We're helping you think through, at least in the US context, of legal documentations and making sure you have things like child protection policy, and helping you discern social media and marketing. Like really kind of, we say, people joke that we're the executive pastor for the church planter. We're helping them make sure they're getting everything done. So we have a checklist of like 380 some items of things that we give them. Some of them are relevant for them, some of them aren't, but so we have them go through the checklist and help figure out what are the things that they need to get done. And then we, having done church planting for over 20 years, we've kind of know, hey, 6 months before, you need to get these things done. 3 months before, this is what you need to be doing. Hey, how are you engaging in your community so people are knowing that a new church is starting? And so really just equipping the church planter and the team to start well and to start. I joke that my team, my finish line with the planter is their starting line, right? I get to walk them all the way up to the starting line, and then I disappear, and then they go. And so I get that journey of celebrating with them through launch day, and then the week 2 when the disappointment sinks in of like, oh, so many of our folks were actually guests and visitors, and they're not coming back. This is who I have to work with, and then remind them, okay, this is the people that God has entrusted to your care. How do you shepherd them well? And so that's been my journey. And then after my team is done, we have church growth and multiplication, where we walk with you anywhere from 2 to 3 years, equipping you with tools so that your church is growing. And our prayer is that your church would be multiplying. So
good, Sam. I'm wondering, because there's a smaller crew of us tonight, we were going to have some Q&A at the end, but I'm sure even out of what you've had to share already, whether, some of our guests may have a question already. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but as I look across, whether it be Gene or Thomas or Ian, if there's anyone else who has a question at this point before I jump in. It doesn't have to be, but it's just too captivating, Sam. Well, I wanted to go. There's particularly 2 areas that I'm intrigued in, particularly for this group and for what you've started to share. I guess the area that I'm really interested in, what you've kind of started to talk about, is particularly the bi-vocational nature of your ministry. And we will come to you made a comment around how you realized you were married to your ministry rather than to your wife and to your family.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important comment, particularly about how ministry can become all-encompassing and the ways that you've been able to navigate how to do that in a more healthy fashion. But I
Yeah.
guess where I want to go to first is talk to us about some of the struggles of bivocational ministry, some of the things that you've had to wrestle with,
Yeah.
some of the unique joys and challenges that you've both experienced as a bivocational planter, but also as you've been coaching potential bivocational church planters as well.
Yeah. I think probably the first thing is identity. It's dangerous to start comparing yourself to other people. And also assuming that, like, I think at least for me, the beginning years of like, okay, this bivocational thing is just going to be for a few years. God's going to bring the people, and then I'll turn full time, right? But then over time, realizing actually this is exactly how God has me wired. These are the things that God's called me to do, and so I don't need to um, hope for something that God's not desiring for me, and be content in the season that I'm at. And so be faithful and trust. The challenge of bivocational ministry is you grow at a slower pace. You're it's not like you can have a quick turnaround. Sometimes things drag out. Like we just started what we've called connect groups because we're coming out of pandemic. We were just realizing that people were not hospitable anymore and they were not connecting, right? Like they had been isolated for so long. And so, but that process of starting those groups took almost 9 months, where I think in other churches it was significantly faster. But it's just slower. You're working with other folks who are bivocational. And so you're working at their schedules. So you're navigating, hey, when can you meet with people? When can you not meet with people? So those kind of challenges. I think the other challenge is I think the way that I look at it is you just have a lot of cracks and you can't address all the cracks. So you're constantly keeping your eyes on which cracks are getting bigger. But and so you say, all right, I've got to focus on that crack before that becomes a manhole, and people go through that, right? And so, but you're just not able to address every crack at the same time. So those are some of the challenges. I think some of the blessings are you quickly realize you can't do everything on your own. And so you have to build up a team. And so like for us, our mentality has been like, as we have recruited volunteers, immediately telling them, hey, you don't have to earn my trust. I trust you. Own it, run with it. If you mess up, it's okay. You're fine. But you can lose my trust by not faithfully serving. But you have my trust. So own it, run with it. And so, which has really enabled us to get to the point where we've been able to send 14 people out. Like God has really enabled us to raise leaders. Unfortunately, he doesn't allow us to keep leaders. He keeps taking them away to serve in other places. The other part of it was even with preaching, like 4 or 5 years ago, my worship pastor had asked me, hey, he'd love to learn how to preach. So the plan was to do a preaching cohort with him. And then someone else asked if he could join, and another lady asked, and pretty soon I was teaching 6 people over the course of a summer, like how I prep a sermon. And so, but I gave them the condition, like, hey, if you're going to do this, our church is small enough, you're going to preach for me on a Sunday. And so as soon as the cohort was done, they took the next 6 weeks and preached for me. So I had 6 weeks off that I got to rest and enjoy. We're starting a new series this week on looking at the meals that Jesus had. I do the introduction, and I'm not speaking for 9 weeks after that because there's a team of different people that have been equipped, trained. And so you're constantly investing into people and developing them. And I think the other part is, I think the beauty of bivocational ministry is you get to become the training hospital, right? There is right across the street from our church, there is a heart specialty hospital. And then 2 blocks down from that, there's a hospital connected with the university. In the university, there's a lot of residents who are being coached by Dr. doctors that are above them. In the heart specialty hospital, I pray that it's not a resident working on my heart, right? I hope it's the best of the best of the best, right? So I think in bivocational ministry, you're more like the training hospital where you really get to equip people, train them, and then maybe they might end up at the specialty hospital. Like one of my guys who I got to mentor 10 years ago now is pastoring a church of 2,500, right? So he is at a church where they've got resources, they've got funding, but a lot of the opportunities for him to grow in ministry was happening in the context of our local church. And then God just opened more and more doors for him to be able to serve in other capacities. And so, yeah, so I think those are some of the blessings and the challenges.
So good. I love that, Sam, and particularly that line that you used about God asks us to raise leaders, but he doesn't ask us to keep them. I think that's an absolute pearl, and I couldn't agree more. Like Anne-Marie's dropped in the chat, if there's any questions that come to mind that you want to chuck either your hand up as a reaction, or you want to, anything like that, we'd love to make this as interactive as possible. I guess the next question, as I alluded to, Sam, was particularly around, obviously it sounds like there was a moment in your ministry where you realized that you'd kind of, you had used the words married your ministry, like your wife had talked to you about that. I wonder what have some of the lessons that you've learned since then that have been really significant to having a healthy balance, both for your ministry, for sustainability, for ongoing ministry health. I wonder if you talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think for me, as I over the years created my rule of life, my first thing was above everything Jesus, but then secondly, without family, I'm nothing. And the realization that if my family's not encouraging and supporting, it doesn't matter what I do, right? Like everything else ministry related fell under what my family is. And so just some hard decisions of like I think before I joined the staff of Stadia, I was doing an 8 to 5 and then come home and I would jump right into church stuff. And like I pop out of my office to go eat dinner and then jump right back in to do church stuff because I felt like there was a sense of urgency. And so just making some decisions of, all right, how much am I gone? So like for me, I'm only gone from the house one night a week. We don't do midweek services. We just don't have the bandwidth, and we have not felt like that's where God was leading us. So I've committed Thursdays. I'm not going to be at home for dinner, but every other day I'm here. I've blocked off Fridays to just Sabbath and rest. So I finished my work at Stadia on Friday afternoon, and then Friday evening, I'm hanging out with the kids, hanging out with my wife. We're playing games, playing movies, watching movies, whatever. And then I don't do church stuff till Saturday at noon. So Friday from noon, Saturday till noon, not looking at church stuff. Phone is basically disconnected. So making sure that's a priority. Both my wife and I both work full time. So quarterly, just trying to get away, just for the two of us to be together. We try to do date nights. For the longest time, it was hard. We'll probably do date nights once every couple weeks of just the two of us getting together and being together. But then the other thing was making sure those rhythms were instilled into my leaders, right? Like making sure they're following the same thing, the same principles of, man, your marriage has to be priority. Church is your call as a pastor, your call as a leader is a vocation. At the end of the day, you've got to be able to be balanced where your family is your number one ministry. And so make sure you're addressing that, taking care of that. So, I think in our house, it's 5 a.m. here. So my kids are asleep, but when I'm on calls, like my door's always open. Like, I have told my kids is like ministry is not going to be priority over you guys. So sometimes when I'm on a church planter call, my 10-year-old will come in asking for questions, right? And so, but they're just a realization that there's times when I've told them, hey, I've got a hard call, I need some time, you can't be on it. But other than that, like I want them to be engaged in ministry. The other part of it, like my family has been involved in every aspect of ministry. Like, so my kids come with me early on Sunday mornings. My 10-year-old is the one who's helping set up communion for me. My 9-year-old gets nursery ready. My 16-year-old, my 16-year-old during pandemic was the only one that would come to church with me to do live streaming. And he got so good at it that coming out of pandemic, our worship guy was like, can we just make him the video director? So he's 16. He's now the director of our video team, and he's got a group of 8 people that he's leading. So we've got teams for everything. So we got the preaching team, video team, audio team. So everyone only serves once a month. And so he leads a team of 8, and he's only 16, and he's constantly YouTubing, learning. And so for them at that point, for me growing up pastor's kid, I hated because my dad was bivocational. He was always gone because he was caring for an immigrant church. That was my biggest turnoff to ministry, was we never saw dad. But for my kids, of like them, they're seeing me now, and they're also involved and engaged in ministry in ways that they love and enjoy. So I'm headed to Honduras next week, and my oldest is coming with me. And so when we went to South Africa a few years ago, my middle one came with me. So inviting them to join and be a part of the things that I'm doing. So yeah.
So good, Sam. Hey, again, just a reminder, if anyone else has any other questions, I know Thomas has chucked a question in the chat there, so I'm going to ask Thomas in a moment to take himself off mute, and we can hear another voice that's not just me and Sam, so that'll be nice. But if there are any other questions coming through, otherwise we may make this our last question before we wrap up our time together this evening. So, Thomas, did you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Sam. Really interested in your training up of leaders. I guess that would involve, I'd be interested to hear what that involves a bit more, like discipling them in their faith journey as well as the skills. And do you identify potential leaders? And if so, what do you look for?
Yeah, so 2 sides. There are folks who do definitely come and say, hey, I'd love to serve and I love to be involved. So, I mean, that side is there. But one of the things that we have asked our team leaders and our community group leaders is constantly, hey, who are the people that you see as leaders in the group, right? And so who are the people that could potentially take over your role? And so the constant push to say, the people that are sitting on the pews, that we should be engaging them. We should be developing them, growing them. The first several years of the preaching cohort, it was a open invitation to anyone that wanted to grow. The last several years has been more of a, hey, we see something in you. We see God is doing some work in your life. We'd love to invite you to be a part of this. I'm intentionally doing a Bible study with a group that I think are all leaders, but they're all young, just got married or just had babies. And so this is a season of training and pouring into them, knowing that here in 6 months to a year, like, we're going to ask them to do some stuff, so, and invite them to journey with them. So the other part for me, in terms of training, mentoring, the burden is on our people, and it's not on me. Like, I tell them, here's my calendar link. You want to spend time and learn and grow, you're scheduling a time with me. So I'm not going to chase you down. If you're serious about this, you have to be. So I have 4 folks who I meet with bi-weekly because they're really serious about it. Like, they're like, hey, I want to be mentored. So I'm reading 4 different books right now with 4 different people. So because they each need something different, right? And so but like really walking with them on where they're at and what they need. So that's the other part of, like, there's parts of ministry that you're custom making for each person based on where they're at and what God is teaching them and how they're growing in that season. So yeah.
So good, Sam. I wish you'd be my mentor with the amount of books that you're reading. Very impressive.
A lot.
Sam, yeah. As one final question for you, particularly in your role with Stadia, I just wonder, as we've heard a little bit about Stadia and what Stadia is doing, how can people connect more with Stadia, both by way of some of the assessment tools that you guys have available, different trainings that I know would be US-centric, but how can we learn more about Stadia?
Yeah, so stadia.org is our website. And on that website, a couple things that are there. I think the discovery page is huge. So on the discovery page, our discovery process, which is what used to be called assessment, is divided into three sections. The first one is explore. Am I called to start a new church? And so that is self-paced. There's a lot of questions, reflection, just processing and prayer. And then you're working through and you're exploring, is there a call to plant a church? That's phase one, exploration. Phase two is discernment. Am I ready? Am I ready to plant a church? And so in that area, how am I doing in marriage, finances, where are we at, personality, life circumstances, situations. Again, that's self-reflection. You are discerning based on what you see. So at least here in the US, we do like background checks and financial readiness and things like that to help them discern. We have our potential church leaders go through a psychological assessment. And then the discovery event, we invite them to come. We see what their skill sets are. And we work through 4 competencies basically to see, hey, are they strong in these competencies or are they lacking, right? So number 1 is gospel competency. How do I live out the gospel myself? Has the gospel really sunk in where it's transformed my life? And am I sharing the gospel with other people? Why plant a church if you don't care for the lost, right? Like there's plenty of churches. Why spend resources, money if you're not pointing people toward Jesus? And so gospel competency is 1. Entrepreneurial competency, because we're multimodal, we are just basically saying, hey, do you have a vision for what kind of church God's calling you to plant? Do you know what kind of people you need around you? Do you know what kind of funding do you need? Do you know what kind of leaders do you need? And so making sure they have that entrepreneurial skill set. Then relational. How do you work well with other people? How do you connect? And then the last piece of that is the cultural competency, that you are uniquely culturally wired. But then also as God leads you, the mandate of the gospel is, even if you plant in a homogenous church community, the mandate of the gospel is to go to the ends of the earth. So his desire is that you would be able to reach all people with the gospel. So are you culturally aware of your culture? But then also, how are you in process of learning and from other cultures? And so based on those 4, like those are the 4 things that we are discerning. Like we don't discern theology. We don't discern church polity. That's the responsibility of the local church. And we believe, like, man, if a church is sending someone to us, they've got those things figured out, right? But we're trying to figure out, should they be planting or starting a church? And so coming out of discovery, you get a couple recommendations. Hey, go plant a church. We think you're ready. Like, man, God's hands all over you. Go for it. Like, there's no concerns. Very rarely does anyone get that, because I think everyone has opportunities to develop and grow. So a lot of people will get number 2, which is we're ready, but as you go, here's some things that you could work on. For example, like we just in an event, we had a guy from Ohio who was faithfully serving in the local church for 15 years, but they're moving to Orlando to plant. So the simple recommendation for him was, your wife has never lived outside of 5 miles from where she was born. Now she's moving to a completely different part of the country. Make sure she's taken care of. Make sure she has counseling and she's got friends that she is constantly connecting with, right? So just making sure they're healthy as a family. Number 3, a lot of churches will send planters to us a year in advance. And they basically say, hey, we have a year with this guy or with this lady. Over the course of this next year, what are some areas that we can really focus on this person? So that they get a short-term recommendation, and we give, hey, this person, these are 3 or 4 areas, church, that you could work on with him or with her before you launch them out. And so a lot of that often is hey, work in a church plant, understand what church plant dynamics are. So we had a guy who we assessed last year. I just got a text from him yesterday. He's met all the requirements. He's going to plant and wants us to serve him, right? But he spent the year learning on some of the areas where he needed to grow. And then the last area is long-term recommendation. Stadia's posture is we're not God. So we will not tell you you should not plant a church, but we'll give you a long-term recommendation, basically meaning there's some major things that you need to work on, and you should not plant a church for at least 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, if you still feel that conviction that you should plant a church, you've got to go through this entire process again. And so if we're not saying that you shouldn't plant if God's calling you to plant, but this is not the time to plant. And so, yeah, so those are some of the ways that we serve. Really, I love the model because like every aspect of it is, man, this is where we sense God is leading you. Like, even if it's hard, like I had a guy super mad that we gave him a long-term recommendation. But then 3 months later, he came back and was like, man, this is exactly. And our reason for long-term recommendation was not because we had any character flaws, but he was wired to be an evangelist. He was wired to just go and share the gospel with people. He was not called to be a pastor. And he was just realizing, like, after processing, he realized, yeah, we were like, our discernment was exactly what he needed to hear, that pastoring would have drained him, but him being able to go and share the gospel with people and love on people, that's what gives him life and energy. And so, yeah, so like just being able to bathe that whole process in prayer and really speak truth and life into people's lives has been just, I love that whole process. It's been really neat to see. So
good, Sam. I think particularly what you've just started sharing there around some of those elements has really got people quite engaged. And so I'm going to allow that one more question that's just come through. Tom, I think Thomas, that's a great question. Maybe you take yourself off mute again and ask that. That's fantastic.
All right. So I have heard different theories on this, but just, how much of the success of a church plant do you see comes down to the church planter themselves? And what are the other factors involved in whether that church goes on?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, you can go multiple ways, right? Like, we have seen some folks who they haven't had the character, but for some reason God allowed the church to grow, but then it comes crashing, right? Whether that person falls. And so, but then I do think a major part of it is the investment that the church planter makes, right? The investment that he pours into the team, the commitment that as he leads, and the ways that he stays healthy, right? I think, I think a lot of pastors, some of the challenges that they face is like 5 areas of ministry that pastors lack, and reasons that they quit ministry: leadership and management, their own personal soul care, like they're not spending time with Jesus themselves. They're only preparing sermons week in and week out, and that's their devotional time. Marriage and family, emotional and cultural IQ, of just knowing your own emotional IQ, cultural IQ. And then the last one is friends. I think most pastors don't have friends. We have a lot of acquaintances, but we don't have deep friendships. And so, I think when pastors are thinking through those 5 things of saying, hey, how am I growing in my leadership and management? How am I making sure I have some friends where I can be really honest and deep with, that love me, not because I'm a pastor, that love me because I'm Sam, right? Like that was my challenge as a church, was like, I have some deep friends at church, but I'm also their pastor. There's only a certain level I can get up to them without them, my fear of them judging me or questioning me, right? And so finding some friends outside of church that I get together on a monthly basis that pour into me, just make sure that I'm healthy. And so I think so. So I think, and that's a long answer to your question, but really just making sure you're healthy as a pastor, so that as the church is going to go as far as the health of the pastor, right? I mean, so if you're healthy, You're going to be developing leaders. You're going to be confident in the work that God's called you. You're going to be confident in the people that God brings around you. If you're not healthy, you're constantly questioning, wondering, oh, is that person trying to take my role? Is that person undermining me? Like, you're just, because you're not healthy. And so I think as you stay healthy, the church will stay healthy. So
can we maybe give a bit of a Zoom applause to Sam? Just thank him for his time. We've been a small group this evening, but what you have shared with us, Sam, has been brilliant, and really appreciate the wisdom that you've just been able to distill for us. I really appreciate the time that you've taken, particularly getting up at just before 5 a.m. in Dallas. So that's a huge sacrifice. So we really appreciate your time. The last thing that we just wanted to bring to everybody's attention before we sign off for this evening is we were joined by a special guest in our morning session with the planters that joined us this morning, a guy by the name of Aussie Dave, or Dave Adamson, who, for those who have heard of Dave Adamson, he is a well-known Australian online pastor. He does a wide range of things, has worked closely with Andy Stanley and North Point, and he's also the director of Orange Australia and New Zealand. If you haven't heard what Orange is, Orange effectively is curriculum in order to enable churches to work more effectively with both kids and young people, but also with the parents within churches to actually proactively disciple young people. And so one of the great partnerships that has emerged between Exponential and Orange is that Orange have wanted to be able to offer, particularly through our Church Planters Collective, those who are planting churches, initially free access to their Orange resources, which is usually in excess of $2,000. And so if you are a church planter, particularly in your first year of planting, they want to offer that for free, and then in subsequent years, discounted rates as you are planting churches, which is just an enormous gift on behalf of Orange. And so what we're going to do off the back of our second quarter Church Planters Collective, if you'd like to go and check out some more information, Anne-Marie's just thrown that into the chat section. But we're going to be sending out a follow-up email to those on the Church Planters Collective, just letting them know of this offer. Which is a very, particularly when you're planting a church, when you're in the thick of it, when you are getting something started, worrying about kids ministry and working with, kids is a very serious challenge. I know that from experience myself. And so pretty much they wanted to do all they can to be able to help church planters be able to do that well. And so, like I said, we're going to send out a follow-up email, but that was our special announcement for our second quarter, just to let you know about that. If you're interested, please respond, and we'd love to give you more details and put you in contact with Dave, who's going to be able to sort that out for you. So that's a very exciting thing. Well, guys, that is all from us this evening. Thanks so much. Even while, again, we're small in number, we have so appreciated your time. Sam, thank you so much again for joining us. And we really hope that we can connect with you guys both at our next quarterly Church Planters Collective. Dates for that will be out soon, as well as our national conference in October. It's been so great to see you. Thanks so much, guys.